This is Wednesday, November 27th, 2007. We're in Carolyn Cope's lovely home. She has allowed us to speak to her about her life and family relations. Carolyn, do you remember your great-grandparents and grandparents? Can you tell us about it?
I only remember my grandmothers. Both of my grandfathers on my mother's side and my father's side had died before I was born.
Yeah.
My mother's mother was from Colorado, Scotch-Irish, and my father's mother, Mamay, never spoke English. She was French-Canadian. She had 18 kids.
Ooh.
The last one was stillborn. My dad was number 9. And there's one surviving sibling to date, back in Maine, Bernadette, who I take after, the family says. And she's 90. She'll be 91 in April.
Wow.
And she was number 15. All the rest have passed on. Isn't that something?
That is something.
But I remember Mamay fondly.
Uh-huh.
She was a wonderful woman. I mean, if you have all those kids, you have.
Did they come west at all? Any of them?
They came a couple of times during my childhood just to visit for a short period of time, because there was not only my father out here, there was my Aunt Jeanette and my Aunt Teresa. So 3 of them were on the West Coast.
They were out here.
Yeah, in Encinitas and one in Pacific Beach.
What was the livelihoods of your grandparents?
On my mother's side, my grandfather, they were farmers, but he was the politician.
Mm-hmm.
He went as far as the legislature in the state of Colorado. And so he was I guess I take after him in that respect with my political activeness.
Right.
But he taught me one thing, and he had died. I'd never met him, but my mother used to say, when they would print, slander about him or what he might have done that was illegal in the papers,
Right.
he'd just brush it off and say, my enemies will say whatever they want, but my friends know who I am.
Right.
And that's the truth. You can print whatever you want, and if it's not true, who cares? He knew who his friends were.
Yeah.
And he knew the truth.
That's great.
And now my father's side of the family, with all those children, they had like a boarding house for travelers. It was a large house, and they would take on boarders and transient workers in Canada. They had a dairy farm. They'd have to get them early and move the cows, milk the cows, that sort of thing. But they remember this large home where people would come and go.
They were busy people.
Very busy.
Farmers
and just
are
trying
busy.
to feed all those kids. They didn't have much, but they were alive and they had each other.
Yeah.
And that was about it. But material goods were scarce.
Now, tell us about your mom and dad. How did they meet, and how did your dad come down from Canada?
Dad came down here, first he went to New Orleans to visit his Aunt Jeanette, or his sister Jeanette, my Aunt Jeanette,
Yeah.
who had married a German. They had a traveling photography business, kind of like what they have at the fairgrounds, where you go in and you
Yeah.
pay $1 and you get 4 photos.
Right.
And so he just came down to join them. And in New Orleans, French-speaking part, it was more comfortable for them
natural,
because
yeah.
he didn't speak English. And then they eventually moved out here because of my uncle, the German, was savvy about picking up property on the West Coast. And he had made enough money to start purchasing some property, which he did in Pacific Beach and Leucadia. He eventually sold it here.
What's
So
the
anyway,
time date on that?
30s,
30s?
late 30s.
Yeah,
I would
good
say in
time
the
to do
30s. And then his other sister came out from Canada to escape a bad first marriage situation, and it was like, come out here and get out of that, and we'll take care of you. And
Yeah.
and then
Okay. And
She was fine.
now, Mom.
My
Is she
mother-
a Colorado girl?
Colorado, she was born in Kansas, just across the line, but she was born and raised in Burlington, which is a farming community, Burlington, Colorado.
So
And
was
she
farm girl?
came out here when her brother, Ralph Boggs, who had married Martha Boggs, who was the first home ec teacher at San Diego, and was for years until she retired. He was out here, and she just, young girl, wants to get out of the state, wants to leave home and see what's cooking on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when she came out.
So how did they meet, your mom and dad?
It was through Helen Dennis, who lived up here on Cornish. Just knew them both. I don't know how she met either one. Well, small town. I mean, it wasn't that many people here at that time, probably close to 4,000.
And what was the date on this, roughly?
This was in the early 40s. They married in, must have been 42. And, gee, I wish I had written that down. Sorry.
Yeah.
But, so they were married here. And then Dad was called, well, he joined the Army at that time. And Mom went back to Colorado to stay with her family while Dad served his military obligation that he wholeheartedly wanted to do at that time.
Now, he was a Canadian.
French-Canadian.
How did he get his citizenship?
Well, he has all his documents to come into the United States, but he wasn't a citizen. And at some point, the U.S. government realized that a lot of these foreigners that were helping our U.S. troops were deployed overseas. At that time, Dad was in England, and along with a lot of other foreigners that came to help fight the Germans in Europe, they just pretty much gave him his citizenship. I mean, he'd already proved his worth, like most of the other soldiers, too. So that's how he got it. But it's interesting that Dad, though, never felt like an American. He never voted, never got involved politically with anything, and just still always, I think, felt his entire life that he was still a foreigner in U.S. soil.
Mm.
He never talked about the United States as being his homeland, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
But no way was he going back to Canada.
No way.
No way. Way too cold.
Now, you were born, of course. Mm-hmm. And when was that? And you were here in Encinitas, obviously.
On this site where we're sitting right now, where I live now, at that time everyone went to La Jolla, to the Scripps La Jolla, to give birth. But they were building a new wing at that time. It was May 20th, 1950. Mm-hmm. And so they had to take that slow, windy road over Del Dios into Escondido at Palomar Memorial Hospital is where I was born.
Okay. It seems your dad was a groceryman for most of his life. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about his experiences?
His first job was with Sam Miller, the Miller's grocery store, just right below the hill, right behind us. Stone's throw, if you have a good arm.
An old country store.
Old country store, wooden plaques. They had a meat market. So that's where he first started. And then he had been offered a job with the Franciscos, which was a prominent family in Rancho Santa Fe, to work for them because he was a hard worker. He was a good worker. And it was a small grocery store, but it was a little more on the upscale side, Rancho Santa Fe. And he saved his money. Dad was very frugal. To the day he died, he was very frugal. And he had earned enough and had such a good reputation in town as a good, hard-working fellow that when he went to the banks and private individuals, he was given the monies to buy and build the property, which is still in the family hands, 1144 North Coast Highway 101 in Leucadia. Mm-hmm. And I remember, prior to that, he had a little store backing up. His first little store was about the 900 block in Leucadia. Oh. But he didn't have that very long. He grew out of that very quickly because the need for a small grocery store in that area was growing. And I don't think he had that 2 years until the property came available, and he jumped at it. Mm-hmm. And then built the building where the building is still there now. And shortly after that, grocery store was going, which was Roy's Market. Everyone thought his first name was Roy, mm-hmm. but his last name was Roy. His first name was Gerard. the U.S. government approached him about building the post office on the property because there was enough room, there was the need for it, and they had their specs on how they, how they wanted it built. And he went ahead and built it, and still the Leucadia post office is in that very same building. He also was the Greyhound bus stop for that area. And when I worked at the grocery store as a kid, that's where I learned my bookkeeping skills. We had to keep track of the ticket sales, all manually, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Dad received a percentage of all the ticket sales, and I believe it was 10%. And then I did the book, so I got 10% of his 10%, which was maybe $10, $12. But back then, that was a lot of money. So I had I learned to save my money as well. Maybe not as frugal as Dad, but I still watch the dime.
Yeah. Well, you did very well, I'm sure. Now, Bank of America had something to do with his going ahead and building this store. What did they do for him, and how did they
Probably
do
the
it?
loan. Was it Bank of America? I think it was.
Okay.
I think it was.
Yeah.
That was the one that was in town.
Our
That's
Bank
right.
of America downtown.
Uh-huh. They did, they secured the loan just on a handshake, really, and his good name.
We don't do that anymore.
No, we don't do that anymore.
No.
Because, unfortunately, a man's word and handshake don't count like they used to, and that's too bad.
Now, Leucadia has always had a post office. Where was the post office before your dad had the post office?
I'm not sure. I'm not, honestly, I'm not sure, Lloyd, where it was before. It was way before my time.
Okay, all right.
I'm sorry.
That's it. That's an interesting point, though.
Uh-huh.
Let's see. Your dad had several inventions.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about that?
Well, probably the one that's the most interesting that people will remember was his motorized roller skates.
Okay.
And, which ultimately landed him a spot on the Art Linkletter show when I was in the 3rd grade.
No kidding.
No kidding. And can you imagine? But Dad had made these motorized roller skates and the motor was strapped on his back, like in a backpack, and he would have the controls. I mean, thank goodness Dad was a nut, because life would have been really boring otherwise. And he'd never hurt himself, and he wasn't a big guy, he was a little wiry Frenchman.
Yeah.
But he would go up and down the street. And a couple of years he was in our Christmas parade, and it drew attention, I don't know how it got to the Art Linkletter show, but I remember when he was on it, I was in elementary school, and I got to go to my sister's classroom, which was in where the old part of Pawlecki Central, this old central school rooms are.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where the big kids were. And sit in her classroom while they showed the whole class Dad live on the Art Linkletter show. Oh, golly.
That was great.
But one of the things that I wish was marketed better was his Barbie torch, which was a barbecue lighting device.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that didn't fly, although it
didn't really fly, even though the concept and how it was operated was excellent.
Yeah.
I mean, it worked perfect.
Yeah.
But I think even nowadays, most people have automatic starters for their
we do
barbecue.
starters.
So.
Did your mother work at that time too?
No.
No.
She was not allowed to work. She was the homemaker, which was typical of that era.
Mm-hmm.
She had, prior to being married, she worked for Dr. Gabriel as the dentist in town as a dental assistant.
Uh-huh.
But after they were married, Mom said sometimes she'd get so bored she'd iron the sheets, iron the pillowcases.
She was an active gal.
Yeah, she did. And she, in turn, when we were older, all as kids, she was active in the community with the Republican Women's Club and very active with the Boys and Girls Club. It was the Boys Club back then in Solana Beach. She was very active with them.
Okay. How did World War II then affect your family when your dad went overseas?
Well, Dad went overseas, Mom went back to Colorado and just stayed on the farm and helped at the farm.
Mhm.
She thought it was the safest place for her. She didn't like the idea of being single, a single woman alone without family support around,
Yeah.
because it was a bad time.
Yeah.
So she went back to Burlington
Mhm.
and stayed with the family, which at that time then her father had gotten cancer, so she got to be with him in his last days
Yeah.
and his passing. So it all worked
Good.
then.
Now, your brothers and sisters,
Mhm.
they came along. You were not the first.
No, I'm in the middle.
You're in the middle. Okay.
Elaine was born in 1947. I was born in 1950, and then I'll never forget the time my brother came 7 years later in 1957,
Wow.
which at that time Mom was in her 40s, 41, 42, and that was totally unheard of. You know, someone of that age, now it's common. But, you know, there was a lot of fear attached to it. They didn't have all the tests.
Yeah.
And he was a strapping baby boy.
He was
Nothing
good.
wrong. He's fine.
Yeah, he was
He
just-
just turned 50 this month,
Uh-huh.
November 7th.
Now, where are they? What are they doing?
My sister now is in Tucson, owns a home, and her husband, who is also a local fellow, John Terrell, they both work at the Tucson Botanical Gardens
Mhm.
as a docent, or she was a docent and now she's an employee. She's always been into plants and display. And John is just the best handyman there is, can repair and paint. And, she was a docent here at Quill
Mhm.
for years before they moved back out to Tucson.
Now, your sister, Elaine.
Elaine.
Okay, that's your sister.
That's
Now,
Elaine.
your brother.
And then my brother, Kenneth, he's in Vista. And he's working for a French company in the optical, some kind of optical lenses
Mhm.
field.
Yeah. So he's
And
in
his-
sales.
He's in sales and manufacturing, and his wife, Elise, works for the Carlsbad Library. She's a librarian there and has been for a while.
Oh, neat.
Mm-hmm.
As a family then, when you were young, what did you do as a family?
Well, myself personally, one of my dearest memories is Dad and I would play badminton. It was our family sport, badminton, but in the summer,
Yeah.
he'd come home from work, and even if he was dead tired, he'd come out and we'd play badminton. Because I'm very competitive,
Uh-huh.
and I was the one who was always on the girls' athletic teams.
Yeah.
I played volleyball, baseball, volleyball, field hockey, all my life. I just loved it. And I was the only one that did that.
Yeah.
So Dad and I would get into fierce badminton games. And so when we would have the family over, which was mostly the Roy side of the family, because a nephew came out here from Canada and his wife and kids, and then with his sister being here and her husband and
Right.
2 kids.
Yeah.
And even Jeanette had 1 son.
Mhm.
You know, it was usually the Roy side of the family that would get together. And often, mainly when Mame was here and the other Canadian relatives, I remember sitting around playing cards until all hours of the morning, hearts and spades. And you can play cards without speaking French
Yeah,
or
right.
English. But playing cards is an evening activity.
Yeah. Now, as far as travel is concerned, did your family travel at all?
No, we didn't. We did not take family trips. I remember after Dad had retired, and I was a teenager with an attitude, and my little brother, who was my little brother, we did take a road trip to San Francisco because
Uh-huh.
Dad had gotten some special packet with Greyhound. So we went to San Francisco. Other than that, Dad would go to Canada when he needed to by himself. And we would go to Colorado, usually with the mom's sister-in-law, Martha Boggs,
Uh-huh.
you know, just the kids and the women.
Yeah.
And it was always a road trip.
Yeah.
I didn't fly in an airplane until I was 19, maybe.
Uh-huh.
But we were not vacation family.
Yeah.
Sundays in the winter, not in the summer because Dad worked every Sunday in the summer, but in the winter, family picnics were huge. We would go out to Spooks Canyon, Quest Haven, which is like a whole little metropolis now.
Yeah.
And we do have picnics and hiking.
Yeah.
Always hiking. Dad
Yeah.
really liked getting in the woods.
Yeah.
But there was always just a Sunday drive,
Right.
and with the picnic involved. Mom would always pack a picnic. The first time I had ever been to a restaurant was down here where George's was, at the bottom of the hill, and it was when Mom was in the hospital giving birth to Kenny.
Yeah.
And I thought that was something, someone bringing food to me on a plate already filled. That was great.
Unusual
Yeah,
moment.
the things that you remember.
Tell us about your recreational experiences as a child.
Well, I was out of,
Encinitas at that time.
yeah, I was out of the house.
Open.
Yeah,
What did you do?
Oh, I was out of the house first thing in the morning after doing the few chores that we had, because we didn't have gardens, and all the property was dirt.
Yeah.
When Dad put grass in, that was a huge thing. But Ann Hicks was my neighbor. The Vargases up the hill. Of course, the beach in the summertime. I was there every day, every single day. So I still ocean swim.
Yeah.
In the summer when the water temperature gets up, but
Right.
I'm a fair weather swimmer.
Yeah, right.
But
Like
if
we
it wasn't
all.
for the beach, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'd do. And then in the winter, usually out inland in the sage and the sagebrush just over the hill, out pretty much where the freeway is now, was just our open country.
Uh-huh.
It was beautiful.
That was taken away from you a little
Sure
bit.
was.
When five came in.
5 came in, and that was a big controversy. I remember the adults always being on the phone, always going to meetings, being upset about it, because the one of the plans was to run it through where 101 was, which they thought would ruin the whole character of the coast, which it would have.
Yeah.
I would have fought that one too.
That's right.
But I think it was the least impact where they had chosen to put it. But nonetheless, it took that entire canyon,
Mm-hmm.
which was part of the Cottonwood Creek.
Right. It seems like the Depression was a very hard time. What did you learn from it, or what did your dad learn from it?
Well, Dad just, I wasn't born yet. I'm a baby boomer.
Right.
But Dad never threw anything away. It always had a second or third use. So he would recycle things. He would glue, wire, nail, screw, cement. Always have a second or third use for everything. And we didn't have much by choice. Dad just didn't buy things that weren't a necessity.
Mm-hmm.
And things that we had, he made sure they lasted.
Mhm.
And when he bought new things, it was because that was the only alternative.
Yeah.
And he always, and he's taught me this, if you can't pay cash, you can't afford it. He never believed in paying off or credit.
Yeah.
That was not his way. So to this day, I try as much as I can. About 80% of the time, I'll hold off until I have the cash before I buy something.
You went to several schools then in Encinitas, and can you remember any of your teachers and their experiences with you?
I remember kindergarten was not pleasant for me. It was an older teacher, can't remember her name, but it was just my sister and I at the time, right? And it was down here at Pacific View, and the kindergarten room was wonderful and had a little miniature kitchen and a little miniature living room, and you got to role play. But I couldn't figure out why the boys, when they had to go to the bathroom, went into a separate door than what I would. It was just sheer curiosity. I didn't understand any of that at that time. And I remember I walked in the boys' bathroom just to find out why they were going in there. And that's when they used to spank you.
Yeah.
And I got spanked for that. And I never I didn't understand why.
Yeah.
Why they're in there using
Yeah.
the toilet. I just
Yeah.
wanted to figure it out.
You were an inquisitive child.
Yes.
Now, San Diego High, of course, was your school for high school.
Mm-hmm.
And you had probably many opportunities to become an active person within the clubs
Yes.
and other activities. Can you tell us about that?
I was in a lot of the clubs because academics was not my strong point. Everything else was. I was in all the girls' athletic teams after school. I was also in Future Homemakers of America, FHA. The pep squad, anything that involved physical activity.
Right.
I was involved with. Not so much the student council. That you had to actually sit down and do serious things, and that was not any fun.
Yeah.
But what saved me was all the girls' sports teams, because I'd put everything into it.
Because you loved it.
I loved it.
Yeah.
And nowadays, you can actually get scholarships. I mean, too bad they didn't have back then. I would have gone for something like that.
Right. Now you were in journalism too.
I was in journalism, that's true. I was in the journalism club. I used to write, even at Oak Crest Junior High, I was on the newspaper staff, and then on the Hoofprints staff at San
That was
Diego.
pretty challenging.
I liked that.
Yeah.
And to this day, I still like to write. And actually, two of my kids are real good at writing and putting their thoughts together and making it sound halfway decent.
You had an experience with Maria Lloyd and Rancho Coastal Humane Society. What was that about?
Well, when the Hickses built their house in the country, just on Requisa, which literally is half a mile away, but it seems so far, across the street on the south side of Requisa is when the Rancho Coastal Humane Society was built.
Yeah.
And Maria Lloyd had...
Remember when that was? Excuse me. Probably...
I would say 60s.
60s?
Early 60s,
Early
61,
60s?
yeah. Because we were just impressive kids.
Yeah.
And we loved going over there. There wasn't a lot to do as far as, other than playing in the canyons. We would go across, and Maria Lloyd would talk to us about her experiences in Germany. She was a immigrant she escaped Nazi Germany, and she had a story to tell. I mean, just how they escaped. But she had witnessed not only human life deteriorating, but to see the animals. I mean, they were not even considered a living thing half the time. They just let them starve. But they did that with humans too. That it just really shook her. So that was her goal in life. She would strive to make the animals,
to shelter animals,
give them a pleasant environment, and then adopt them out. Yeah, she didn't even like talking about it. Like a lot of the Germans don't like talking about what happened to the people. She would shudder when she'd think about the animals.
Yeah.
That's something.
Yeah.
She was a wonderful woman, little fiery thing.
Wonderful dedication.
Wonderful dedication, yeah.
Your neighborhood had many interesting families in it. How'd you get along together?
Oh, we all did. We all had a great time, and a lot of them are still here, or the next generation. We had Mrs. Coley, who was Ida Lou Coley's mother,
right?
And Ida Lou became the Mrs. Coley to my kids. So that was two generations of the sweet old lady up the street.
You were just up the street here.
Yeah. The Vargases at the top of the hill. They are a Mexican family, still there. Salvador and Josephine Vargas are still there. The Coxes had lived across the street, and they have since moved on. The Hugheses, the house is still there. It's an interesting house. It's a Sears kit home.
Really?
That Lon Hughes built on that lot. But it, came apparently in a pile of wood, and he put it together. He was actually the first postman in this area, and he was a blacksmith. So the Sturdivant the Hugheses and Sturdivants go back 4 generations.
How about
which is wonderful.
That's great.
Yeah. So when Carrie's my very good friend. Her grandpa was Lon Hughes, Lon and Edith Hughes, Hewes. Her father was a military man. He was with the Marine Corps. Betty Hughes Sturdivant was one of the two daughters that Lon and Edith had. I'm blanking on what her sister's name was. She's passed already, but Edith Hughes is still alive. Carrie is the one of 4 children that Betty Hughes Sturtevant had.
Mm-hmm.
So when they would come into town, about every 3 years with the Marine Corps, they moved them around all over.
Yeah.
We always kept our relationship. And now she's retired and she's taking care of her mother, real close to here. So we see each other often.
Yeah.
Yeah, we go way back.
They're a very interesting family from the standpoint of history.
Of history, definitely. Definitely. They go deeper than I do.
Right. Now, did you marry right out of high school?
Pretty close to right out of high school. Met the kid's father when we were in high school together. And we waited until Tom turned 21. Because in the state of California, you have to have your parents' permission to marry if you're not 21.
Yeah.
So he was 21 July 11th, and July 24th we were married in 1971. Which was, and I'm just a couple months older than he was. I was already 21.
Yeah.
And he was going to school at UCSD with goals of becoming a physician, which he did, and then specialized in as a radiologist.
Now he had a Navy career. How did that happen?
Well, and they still have that program with the U.S. government. You can apply to be part of it if you. They'll help pay for books and tuition.
That's
you have to
good.
be accepted into the program. But if say you go for school for 4 years, then you owe the military 4 years. As Tom went in as a flight surgeon.
Right.
You can go in as a general medic, surgeon, physician, or you can apply for one of the specialties. And so he went into aerospace medicine, which was a flight surgeon. So he had to be trained while he was active duty to care for the pilots. There was submarine medicine, which are particular issues that happen with people that are in the submarine.
Right.
Aerospace medicine are particular medical conditions that can happen to pilots and how you treat them. And then there was Antarctic medicine, with dealing with the particularities of living in the subtropics.
weather.
Yeah, really. I'm telling you. So he was fortunate to get in the aerospace medicine because the perk to attract physicians was that they would teach you how to fly a jet. So he
Right.
got to learn how to fly a jet, and that was fun. But then you had to pay back, which was fine. It was
Now your
fine.
payback, how did that
Payback.
experience,
That was-
got you
was,
involved?
Yeah,
didn't it?
that was wonderful. Well, I enjoyed the whole military experience, definitely. What was upsetting for Tom was that he had finished 1 year of his radiology residency when he had already become a physician, was an MD, was in his radiology residency, had done 1 year when the government called him active duty. But the best part of that is that because of class standing, he got to choose where he would serve his time, and we were fortunate to take the billet that was overseas in Japan. I always wanted to go to a foreign country. It was great experience. I jumped right into the officers' wives club and active there doing orphanage work and all sorts of things. I got a part-time job working in the veterinary clinic under the Air Force at that same base, so that was fun for me.
We did.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then through a friend, I learned and volunteered selling Japanese art to the servicemen and learned about how the Japanese create their pictures, which is woodblock printmaking, and started studying that and selling the contemporary art to the servicemen.
So this kind of established your business
Yes.
of Japanese art.
I just fell in love with it. I was not an art collector or art connoisseur up until that point, but I just really appreciated how the form and how they actually created their pieces, how the art was made, which is woodblock printmaking, and then they have done some other things, mezzotints and...
How much expansion did you experience in that particular business?
Well, I was working on just commission.
Yeah.
and the whole time.
After you came home.
And then halfway through the time in Japan, I came back to California, and we still owned a house in Houston, Texas, so I went back there to make sure that was going fine. There were some things I had to check on. Tom couldn't leave for that period of time.
Yeah.
And I called around all over Texas. I called around while I was here in California, and there was no gallery that's was specific for Japanese art.
Yeah.
You know, some places had one or two pieces. So I thought, oh my gosh, because it sells like crazy in Japan. People love it, and it's a real art. It's a true collectible art form.
Yeah.
And so at that point, I started formulating in my mind how I could market these beautiful art pieces for the public in the United States. So when we returned to Texas, I had been working for this gallery who's based in Tokyo.
Right.
And I made a business loan through Dad and purchased quite a few good pieces and a nice variety of ones that I felt were good marketable pieces of
Right.
art. And I literally went to people that I knew, other physicians mostly, in Houston, and just talked to them about it. And started building up my business almost like a door-to-door Japanese art salesman.
Yeah.
And after 3 years, I also went to Arizona too. My sister was in Tucson, and she worked at Canyon Ranch Resort, which is still a popular fat farm.
Mm-hmm.
And I could do a weekend show there. And so I built up some outside Texas interest, and then I do shows here in California. So between the three, this is obviously before kids, I started building up the clientele and enough cash flow to purchase more,
Right.
pay Dad back.
Right.
Then I opened the gallery in, you're going to make me think, 85 in Houston. And no kids, I had this great gallery. It was successful in that it was unique. Southern Living Magazine wrote us up once, the Houston Magazine did, because of just a very unique, interesting business.
Yeah.
And from the art standpoint, from day one of the doors opening, I had people interested in kimono, netsuke, bonsai, furniture. So I just started getting everything.
Yeah.
And I would do a lot on consignment, because there was a lot of collectors that had things they didn't want anymore but wanted to put them in the one venue.
Right.
So because of that, it was
Yeah.
very successful.
You went into the internet too.
I did only at the end. Only at the end when I was liquidating out, which was just a couple of years ago. I only have a few pieces. The Rising Sun Gallery is still a viable business. It's not, I have not dissolved the business yet, but I've been liquidating down. I do have a couple of very good pieces that are still for sale that I'm just waiting until the right price comes in.
Someone's going to come along. There's always
Yep,
a buyer.
That's right. So I have a print drawer with some.
Now,
good
with
pieces.
Tom, you didn't spend any more time in other cities with his Navy career.
We were in Pensacola,
Oh,
Florida, when he was in the aerospace medicine flight surgery training for 6 months prior to going to Japan. That's where he got his specialty training for the Navy.
How'd you like the South?
Oh, I liked it. I can live anywhere for a short period of time, but that big rubber band of my soul always pulls me back to this spot right here.
Encinitas.
That's right.
Right.
This is home. These are my
So
roots
when
are
did
here.
you come back to Encinitas?
Came back in '88. It was after our daughter was born, first born in '86. Tom's mother had passed away, and the need to be closer to family.
Yeah.
I mean, his family was here, my family was here. We were starting to have our family, and he applied for several jobs in California as a radiologist, and pretty much all of them offered him a job. So he chose the one in National City so we could actually be back in this area. So I
Okay.
was grateful for that.
Yeah. Now, then you started to have a family.
Yep.
And so
Rosanna.
the
Yeah.
kids are pretty well grown now.
Well-
what's going on with them?
Okay, Rosanna is 21 now, and she's in a midwifery school to become a midwife. She has her
Wow.
certificate as a doula, which is an assistant to natural birthing process. So she's kind of in the medical field, but in a more holistic way. She's studied natural herbs. She went to a school for 6 months in New York, upstate New York, to learn, excuse me, herbs and natural. She's a real naturalist and a purist, and a little bit opposite of the mainstream medical physician field, but nonetheless, I think we're going back to that. And so I'm very proud of her with her accomplishments. And she still has 3 more years to go to become a certified midwife. But she's dedicated, so I'm proud of her for that, to finally get herself focused on what she really wanted to do. And she's an acclaimed artist already. She's a gifted artist, difficult way to make a living, but she's been selling her art since she started painting at 16. She's has a lot of people that collect her stuff, and she's very, very good. Very gifted in that.
Part of her mother's heritage.
I guess so. And then Thomas Morgan Cope Jr., second born, he is at UCSD. He is the one that was very interested in the Japanese. I would still, because of my love of the Japanese culture and people, I would host always, even before I had kids, the students that would come in through different organizations from Japan. Because I understood them. I felt like I understood them, knew a little bit about their culture, how to treat them and what to expect from them and vice versa. And so I always hosted Japanese students. Well, Morgan was always fascinated by the Japanese language, particularly. And he is my brainchild. And fortunately, at Oakcrest, they tried it for a semester, and then at the San Diego Academy, they teach Japanese.
Really?
So when he graduated from San Diego, he got the top award for Japanese in the whole school.
Terrific.
So he speaks fluent Japanese. He's been to Japan as a student delegate from the city of Encinitas to our sister city, Amakusa. And he still keeps up his Japanese at UCSD because there's quite a few Asians there, Koreans, Chinese, Japanese. And he is in the mechanical engineering program. He's a junior this year. And that's his thing.
So he wants to be an architect.
Who knows? I think he's going to build some car of the future. He's more mechanical.
Oh, yeah.
Now, he's going to put, nuts and bolts together and make something someday that we'll all hopefully use. And he plays the drums and the saxophone. And then Joseph Gerard Cope, he was born 9 months after my dad died. And so I wanted to get Dad's in there, and Dad's name is Gerard Joseph Eugene Roy.
Yeah.
So I've always loved the name Joseph.
Joey.
So it's Joseph Gerard Cope.
Yeah.
And he is my sensitive one. I call him my sensitive. I have the artistic one, the brainchild, and my sensitive one. Joey is a very kind person, very soft-spoken. He is a gifted writer. He's always floored his teachers with how he can put words together, and his penmanship is impeccable.
So he's a thinker.
Which is unbelievable. These kids, Morgan, who can do numbers and write Japanese, you can barely read his cursive because it's so bad, and Joey's is just perfect. Joey is a accomplished guitarist, and he's working on writing his own music and songs, but he's 18. Morgan is just 20 now, and Joey just turned 18.
Now Joey's in San Diego
He is going
Academy?
to, he's graduated. He's going to Miracosta Community College on the San Alejo Cardiff campus.
Not a bad school to go
Not
to.
a bad school. He is really enjoying it, and he is definitely learning, and his goals are to transfer to probably Santa Cruz. He has friends that are up there.
They've got great English teachers, I
Yeah,
understand.
he that's his strength, is his
That's his
English.
strength. Yeah. That's good. Wonderful.
So I'm very proud of all three kids for their unique talents.
Now, so we've covered our children. And let me check here just a second. Great. Sister City has always been a part of Encinitas. And it is a Japanese city, but they've changed the name. Can you talk a little bit about that?
About the name change?
Name change.
Rick Shea actually was the one that was instrumental. He was one of our first mayors that, now that's a whole long story on how we were connected with Hondo. It was
Right.
Hondo
Right.
initially, and it was for years. That started in '86. And what has happened, why it's changed to Amakusa now, Amakusa, A-M-A-K-U-S-A, Amakusa. They did what Encinitas did, and all throughout Japan. Encinitas used to be Cardiff, Encinitas, Leucadia, Alevenheim.
Mm.
And when we became a city, you know, we were really up for grabs on what we were going to be called.
Right.
I remember even San Diego was bounced around as being what our city would be called. Well, as lo and behold, it became Encinitas.
Right.
All right. Throughout the country of Japan, that same thing happened. They needed to, when Japan was really strapped, they had ordered the small little municipalities to become one. So there were 5 small areas in and around a larger city called Amakusa that they just combined all of their offices to become one city,
Large
which is
group, large group.
Amakusa. And it was, Hondo was not the name chosen.
Right.
And that's how that got changed. And
what about your visitations?
I'd love to going over there. I've been involved almost since the beginning, since I got back here in '88 and learned that we had a sister city, because I was involved with the Japan America Society in Houston, which I do have to point. I left at the top of my game because I was invited to the Japanese consulate's home